Welcome to EPG Pathshala. Today we would be discussing the module that is definitions and characteristics of urban areas. The learning objectives of this module: understanding the various perspectives of defining an urban area, then characteristics of an urban area, the economic base and the function of an urban area, then urban area as defined in the global and the Indian context. Now, what do we think when we think about a city? What comes to our mind? It may be tall buildings, it may be good quality of life, it may be good educational facilities, good healthcare facilities, employment opportunities, then lot of traffic, congestion, then maybe a lot of people. So there are many different ideas, different images come into mind when we think of cities. Now actually, if we have to define an urban area, what is an urban area? When we think of the word urban, urban relates to a city or a town, and an urban area is a human settlement with high population density and infrastructure that constitutes the built environment. Now urban areas, if we see, can be referred to as cities, towns, conurbation. Now what are urban areas? If we have to understand, we find before discussing the different perspectives or different disciplines, how they have defined urban area, if you have to understand what is an urban area, we can easily say that urban areas are places where people from different socio-cultural backgrounds gather, either by choice or by circumstance. And in the urban area, citizens have their needs and aspirations, and the urban area responds to the needs and affects the individual and the societal well-being. Now coming to the different perspectives which are given by different disciplines. Now a sociologist have defined an urban area, and ecologists have also defined an urban area, the geographer has also defined an urban area, and economists have also defined, and a planner has also defined. Now if we go one by one and try to see that how has a sociologist defined an urban area, we find that sociologist has said that urban areas are places with, I'll quote, concentration of people from similar and diverse backgrounds in terms of education and occupation. Now Lewis Wirth, in his paper Urbanism as a Way of Life, has defined urban areas, and he has given 4 important characteristics. The first one is permanence, second one is population size, third is population density, and the fourth is social heterogeneity. So keeping this in mind, we go on to the next definition, which is given by Max Weber. Now Max Weber in his in his essay The City in 1922 said that from a sociological perspective, anonymity is important. That means in a city, people do not know each other. There is an anonymity aspect in the city. Many people do not know their neighbors in the city. So anonymity is one point which Max Weber has put across. Then he has also said the city is a settlement of closely spaced dwellings which form a colony so extensive that the reciprocal personal acquaintance of the inhabitants is lacking, which is maybe in a rural area it is not so. In rural areas, people know each other. Every person knows his or her neighbor, but in an urban area it's not so. So now coming to the economist's definition. Now what's an economy, or the understanding which an economist have talked about? Now because urban areas contribute to the GDP, and urban areas, the lot of activities which are income generating. So from that point of view, we see an economists have defined an urban area and said that urban areas are engines of economic growth. and they are centers of economic generating activities, and as we said, contributes to GDP. Now, the economic definition of an urban area is based on market center. Now, Weber has develops economic typology. He has talked of consumer city versus producer city, industrial city versus merchant city. That means, what is the pivot? What is that economic pivot, or what is the economic activity which drives the city? Which is the trigger in the city? So, it can be more than one function. It can be, I would be discussing later about the functions, but it can be more than one economic activity which drives the city, which helps in the growth of the city. Now, the inhabitants basically, because agricultural activity is not so prevalent in the urban areas depend more on production, that is manufacturing, or the service base, that means tertiary sector. We will come to it later, but basically a service. Therefore, consumer city versus producer city. So, production talks about industrial production. Next, we come to the inhabitants. When we say that, should I quote Weber? By quoting Weber, I have to state that the local population satisfies its everyday requirements in the local market, and the products are acquired or produced by the local population or that of the immediate hinterland. So, there is this talking about the production and the related and the associated marketing of the produce, or therefore, the production and the consumption. So, the economist gives us this perspective. Now, coming to an environmental perspective. What does an ecologist give? What does an ecologist think about a city? So, the ecologists say that the city is a specially concentrated ecosystem. They have compared cities to ecosystems, to natural ecosystems, and therefore, it's said that it is specially concentrated, whereas natural ecosystems, we would be later discussing, natural ecosystems are not concentrated but more diverse, but in an urban ecosystem, it is a specially concentrated ecosystem. It has two components, the biotic components and the abiotic components, and there is a movement of energy and material resources, and also a movement of waste. So, therefore, it is compared with ecosystems, and the structure and behavior of urban ecosystem relates to the direction and rate of flow of materials, opportunity costs, stability characteristics, and risk functions. And as we say, like natural systems take birth, grow, fall sick, and then die. Similarly, urban areas, the analogy given is that for urban areas is that urban areas also, they become urban areas from rural settlements. They grow in size, in activities, in population, and then they fall sick, they start degrading, and then maybe one day we say that yes, they perish, or if no interventions are taken, and then one day they will perish. So, this is an analogy from the environmental perspective which is given for urban areas. Now, as Le Corbusier said, administration is the brain, city center is the heart, transportation and communication networks are blood vessels, water supply and sewerage system are the intestines, parks and open spaces are lungs, water bodies are the kidneys, and the limbs are the production and manufacturing units of an urban area. So, Le Corbusier have also compared or trying to relate the urban area to a human body. Now, coming to the geographer's perspective. Now, what the geographer basically talks about space. So, now geographer has talked about urban areas as areas of special concentration of people in consideration with size, extent, topography and resource. The resource becomes important, and therefore, when we say that geographers generally talk about urban areas or have defined urban areas as a concentration of people with a similar way of life based on job type, cultural preferences, political views, and therefore they relate to a concentration or a density of people. And the cities can be defined in terms of, or distinguished in terms of, areas of different sizes, specialized land uses, variety of different institutions, and use of natural and cultural resources. Now coming to the planner's perspective. As planner, we need to have a more comprehensive approach. So though a sociologist, economist, geographer, environmentalist or ecologist has given their different opinions and definitions, but a planner's approach is a more comprehensive approach, and a planner incorporates all these different definitions and talks about an urban area as a dynamic spatial entity with high concentration of people, various uses and activities on land, connected by transportation and communication networks. So urban area can be referred to as an administrative unit, and also it has a certain population density. So sometimes what we see is that there is a distinction between the towns and the cities. That means the scale of this urban area. Now comes an important dimension which we are discussing now, is about the scale. It can be a town which is less than 1 lakh of people, and more than 1 lakh of population settlements are referred to as cities. Then there can be large cities, we will be discussing that. Now city can also be referred to as a urban way of life with specific social and cultural features and functional places of economic activity and exchange. Now coming from these various definitions, coming down to the characteristics of an urban area. Now that we have learned about definitions, we have to now understand what are these various characteristics, or how does an urban area or a city behave. First of all, as I said earlier, that the urban areas are places with concentration of people and physical development in terms of built form, networks and densities. So with this we have to understand that the cities are complex entities. There is an interplay of economic, social, institutional and environmental aspects. Cities are dynamic and growing. Cities would grow in population size, that means in terms of natural increase or through migration, and cities would also grow in the spatial extent, in size, that is in terms of land area. More and more land areas would get annexed, and cities would also be growing in there, both in population size as well as in area. So therefore we find that they are dynamic and growing. The built up areas also would be growing with that. The facilities and services also would be growing. So therefore the cities are synonymous, or cities are one important significant aspect of the city is that cities are dynamic, and we generally have to take care of it in our planning, while planning our cities. Next is cities are heterogeneous. Cities are diverse. It can be in terms of their size, in terms of their structure, in terms of their form, their economy, the wealth, resources, heritage, environmental status. Within a same city, we will find that various parts of a city are different. So this difference within a city and between cities, we have to understand that cities are diverse and heterogeneous. Next is that the city never works in a silo. City is always related, city always links up or relates or interacts with its hinterland, so therefore it is interlinked with its hinterland in terms of resource, in terms of commodities which come to the city, which go out from the city, in terms of waste disposal, facilities and services. People come to the city for facilities and services, and therefore we see that when we have now this city shows, this drawing shows that there is a city and there is a hinterland of this city. There are links, there are links which we call as physical links, that is the roads, rails which connect the city from to its hinterland, and the commodities move through this and people move through this to come to the city, and from the city people move out to the hinterland for various purposes. Now coming down to considering cities as centers of opportunities in terms of employment opportunities, in terms of activities, people, there are investors, there are manufacturers who come and set up their base in cities. So the city is actually signifies centers of opportunities. There are cities are centers of businesses, innovation, creativity, knowledge creation. So, and then cities are also thought of or are as places with good accessibility, good roads, good connectivity in terms of roads, rail, air. There may be water-based transportation also in various cities. Then cities are also centers of higher level of services, which is not available in the surrounding maybe rural areas or in the hinterland. So there is educational, higher level educational facilities, good quality educational facilities, then healthcare facilities, recreational activities, and also there is physical infrastructure, what we call as water supply, sanitation, waste management. And also cities are centers of administration and governance. They need to be governed and therefore they become centers of administration and governance. Now coming down to the economic base of an urban area, what is the pivot? I was discussing before, I was referring to the pivot. What is the activities which trigger off this development, this growth or the dynamism or in the city? So therefore, as I said earlier, that the primary sector refers to agriculture, forestry, grazing, hunting, fishing. They are all referred to as rural activities, predominantly rural activities, though in many cities we find agricultural areas also, but predominantly there is some amount of land which is agricultural land in many cities one can find, but predominantly it is rural activity. And secondary, that is production based activities, processing based, manufacturing, construction, these activities are found in the urban areas. And also the tertiary sector, what we call as, which incorporates or which includes the trade and commerce, the education, the health, entertainment, social services, hotels and restaurants. All these comes under the service sector, what we call as tertiary sector. So this is the urban characteristics. Now if we see the definition of urban area by the Census of India, which we will come later as definitions, but if we see that the function of a city depend largely upon the occupational structure of its citizens, whether more number of people are working in the secondary sector or the tertiary sector would determine whether what is the function of the city, whether it is an industrial city or whether it is a service sector city. The larger the city, the more would be the functions. It can be both secondary and tertiary in any city, or it can be only tertiary. Now there are cities, for example, there are cities which are based on maybe tourism sector, religious tourism, like Nanded, Ujjain. There may be cities like Chandigarh, which is an administrative city. There may be cities like Jabalpur, or there may be cities like Rourkela, Bhilai, which are industrial cities. So this is about the function of the city and the different activities which are taking place in the city and how many people are employed in the city, which gives an idea, or from where we get an idea about the function of a city. Now coming to the various definitions of cities. Now if we look at the definitions worldwide, we find that there are definitions based on population size. Then there is definition based on density. Then the economic function, as we just earlier in the few minutes back we were talking about the economic function. So, and also the administrative criteria or the political boundaries. Now if we go country by country, we find that Argentina has talked about population. Canada has talked about population as well as density. China has talked about population and as well as density. Japan has talked about population and the economic function. That means how many % of people working engaged in urban activities. Mexico has talked about population. Nigeria has talked about the administrative functions. Then we have Peru has defined urban areas as populated centers with 100 or more dwellings. United States have talked about urban areas again based on population, have defined urban areas based on population and also density. UK has said urban land use of 20 hectares or more, and also the population. So therefore, we see that predominantly population has been the factor which decides worldwide what would be an urban area. Now coming to the definition of which India has given. Urban areas are defined as places with municipal corporation, municipal area committee, town committee, notified area committee or cantonment board. This is depending upon the scale of the city. And then 5,000 or more inhabitants, population density of not less than 1,000 persons per square mile or 400 persons per square kilometer. And at least 75% of the working population to be employed in pursuits other than agriculture, that is in either secondary or tertiary sector. So we see that in our country we have apart from population, the working age group and also the density, which are factors and administrative status is a factor or are factors of deciding whether any settlement will be termed as urban. So today, dear students, today we have learnt the various perspectives of understanding urban areas, from a sociologist's perspective, an economist's, a geographer's, a planner's perspective, and then we have also learned the characteristics of urban areas, the various economic the functions of urban areas, the economic base of urban areas, and how we have defined, how various countries worldwide have defined what are urban areas, and in our country, that is in India, how we have defined urban areas. Thank you.